This is my girlfriend's father's story. To avoid any confusion, I will tell it exactly the way it was told to me, from the perspective of her father. Me and some friends of mine, who I'll call Ralph and Eddie, decided to take a fishing trip together, just to get away from everything for a while. The day itself went off without a hitch. Many joints were smoked, many beers were drank, and there was lots of laughs between old friends. If you're familiar with the state of Massachusetts, you'll know of a certain area in the southeast called the Bridgewater Triangle. We were right in the heart of it. For me, I returned home to my wife and kids. The following day, Eddie called me up. "Hiya, Ed. I had a lot of fun yesterday. We need to do it again soon." "Yesterday? You mean the worst night of my life?" I was dumbfounded. In my mind, Ralph, Eddie, and I had a great time. But after that phone call ended, I fully understood what happened. While driving home, Eddie was heading down a back road through a town called Bridgewater, and after taking a left onto a dark road, he traveled for a few more miles and saw what seemed to be an injured man hobbling his way down the pitch-black road. Being the kind individual he was, he pulled up alongside the man. Now he was able to see him closer. The man looked like he was in a horrible car accident. Mounted to Ed's truck was a movable light, and he positioned it to face the man before asking, "Hey buddy, are you okay?" Once the light hit the man's face, Ed's blood ran cold. Imagine seeing the body of a man who had just gone through an airplane propeller, but is somehow still held together. The man's large eyeballs were hanging from his face. The creature's only response was to crook its broken head and ask,
"Can I get a ride?"
It struggled to speak, croaking out its words from a torn-out throat. Eddie stared at this abomination for what could have been no more than 10 seconds before speeding off. He nearly doubled the speed limit the rest of the way home, and he hasn't talked about that night or has gone fishing with us since. This story is from back when I was a senior in high school. I'm 25 now, but I can still remember this like it happened yesterday. I was walking to my dad's house after spending some time with my then-girlfriend. It was around 9 p.m. There was a shortcut next to a lake that I usually took to get back to my dad's place. The lake itself was used as a dumping ground. Every week or so, some piece of shit would back his truck up to the lake and throw garbage into it. This is definitely not the kind of lake that you would want to swim in. People around here have claimed to see alligators, but I've never caught a glimpse of one myself. As I passed by the dark water, I felt that something was off, like I was being followed. The streetlights weren't working that night, so it was dark, and I couldn't see much of my surroundings. But something did tell me to walk faster, so I did. My dad's house was just around the corner. After a few more steps, it became undeniable that something was behind me. I thought perhaps someone was looking to rob me, which would have been scary enough on its own. From the road up ahead, I heard somebody honking. I then saw a guy driving a moped, and that's when I turned around. I didn't see anything behind me except for a very tall palm tree. The tree had to be more than 10 feet high, and the leaves were shaking. There was no wind out that night, so something had to have knocked against it to cause that disturbance. The guy in the moped circled back, then stopped on the side of the road and shouted to me, "I don't know what was just following you, but you had better get out of there." I was creeped out at this point, and I quickly closed the gap between where I was and the safety of the street. What did you see?" "When I was passing by, I saw something behind you." It looked strange, and it was moving all weird. No shit? Yeah, I figured it was gonna attack you or something. That's why I blew my horn. Damn. Well, thanks, man. Yeah, no problem. Do you need a lift or something? No thanks. My dad's place is right there. Oh, okay. Well, you take care, and be careful walking around here at night. After I thanked him again, the guy watched me cross the street and then took off as soon as I approached my dad's doorstep. The next day, I went back to the same spot where this all happened. I saw that the palm tree had these deep scratch marks on it. I hadn't seen them the night before because it was too dark, but these marks definitely didn't belong to a dog. It was more like a mountain lion. But I don't think that is what was following me that night. It would have taken more than a moped horn to scare off a lion, suggesting that whatever it was had the intelligence to be evasive. It didn't want to be seen by anyone. To this day, I'm still left wondering what could have happened if that guy on the moped didn't save my ass. The story took place around 4 years ago, in a small town called Kingwood, just outside of Houston. At the time, I was 12 years old, and I had a lot of friends who I would bike with. On the day in question, my friend Jake and I were planning on riding deep into the woods to find a cave called the Cave of Hell. We had heard about it through some of the older kids that went to our school. A few weeks prior, there had been several people who had gone missing in the area, and our imaginations were running wild as to what happened to these people. Some said that the thing that lived inside the cave would roam through the forests at night, looking to devour anyone who happened to be taking a night stroll. Anyways, we began to make our way to the main entrance of the trail system. To put our surroundings into perspective, the main entrance had a small gate that led into an old parking lot that desperately needed some tree trimming. The starting points to several different trails lined the side of this lot. There was also an old shed in the far left corner, which always gave me the creeps. We were told that to find this cave, we must take the trail on the far right and travel on it for about a quarter mile until we saw a fork in the path. We would then make a left and walk for a few minutes until we reached the cave's entrance. As we entered the abandoned parking lot, I felt very uneasy. It was like something was watching us from somewhere in the overgrowth that surrounded us. Despite this, we found the trail and made our way through until we discovered a fork in the path. At this point, the sun was beginning to set. We hid our bikes in some nearby bushes and began walking down the path. As we approached the cave's location, the sky grew darker. It was as if nature herself was warning us to turn back. I was also worried about how angry my parents would be if I didn't get back before curfew. My imagination could have been running wild about what might be out there in the forest, but that was a very real reason to worry. We walked for about another minute until we came across the Cave of Hell. It was situated on the precipice of a massive cliff. There was graffiti and beer bottles everywhere, which kind of made me feel more at ease, knowing that other people had been here and were presumably able to deface the place without being slaughtered. Jake started to make his way into the cave, tugging on my shirt, but I absolutely did not want to go in there. "What's your problem?" "There's no way in hell I'm going in there." "But that's why we're out here." "Yeah, that was before I actually saw it with my own eyes. I've had a really bad feeling since we've been out here. Plus, it smells like something died in there." "Well, I'm going in. You can stay out here and piss your pants." I then watched Jake disappear into the cave. Jake had always been a daredevil. He was the kind of guy who would have grown up to be a skydiver or something. I decided to sit on some rocks and just wait for him to be done. After a while, I noticed that my curfew was approaching. I desperately wanted to go home to avoid being chewed out by my parents. "Hey, Jake, we gotta get going." There was no response when I yelled his name into the cave. I tried again and again, but still, nothing. More pissed off than I cared to admit, I sat back down on the rocks and began playing a game on my phone. That's when I heard a scream coming from the cave, followed by what sounded like howling. I jumped to my feet and soon heard Jake yelling at the top of his lungs. "Go! Go! We need to get the fuck out of here now!" Something was screeching and howling behind him. I was already running by the time Jake emerged from the cave. I didn't want to find out what the hell was chasing him, but I couldn't help but to look behind me. I only remember seeing something with a pair of antlers at the cave's entrance. The first thing that came to mind was a moose, but mooses don't usually stand on their hind legs. We both ran faster than ever before back onto the trail. The screeching continued to follow us. After we finally made it back to our bikes, we booked it out of there as fast as possible. We didn't even realize that we had left our phones back there. When I suddenly jumped up from the rocks when I heard Jake screaming, my phone fell out of my hands, and I was too scared to even scoop it up. Jake's phone was dropped somewhere in the cave. The rest of the trip home is a blur to me. By the time we got back to my house, my parents had already called the cops. We told the police and our parents that an animal had chased us in the forest. The genuine fear in our eyes helped the lie. We didn't want to sound like we were making excuses for being out so late, and something had chased us, but it definitely was not an animal. Jake and I went our separate ways after that night. I'm sorry to say that he died from an overdose not too long ago. I never got the full story from Jake as to what exactly he saw in that cave. Whatever he experienced must have traumatized him, and he turned to drugs to bury his fears. We never went back to retrieve our phones for obvious reasons. I moved away from Kingwood about a year later, and aside from attending Jake's funeral, I've never been back there.